All right. This is, what is this? Unit 7, Lecture 3, talking about psychodynamic and humanistic theories of personality. So we've talked about Freud. We've talked about this, that was in Lecture 1. We talked about Freud and psychosexual stages of development, the ego, the superego. Lecture 2, we talked about defense mechanisms. I guess I was repressing there for a second. We're talking about defense mechanisms and how those are used not just in psychoanalysis or Freudian theory, but it's used in all theories, but specifically Freud ties it to the battle between the ego and the superego. Now we're going to take a look at the idea of psychodynamic and theory as opposed to psychoanalysis, very close. And we're also going to look at the humanistic theory of personality. Remember, the humanistic theory is one that's very positive. Can you be the best you can be? So both of these are going to be looking at how they impact our development of our personality, and away we go. So the idea of trying to figure out what's going on in psychoanalysis, we're trying to test what you're not thinking about. So that's a big, big challenge. How do I get someone to talk about what they're not thinking about? How can I get past the ego and get down to the id and get down to the superego, their true feelings and everything else? In class, we're doing some personality tests. I'm not going to include them right here, but there's something that we've done in class. If you want to go back and look at the PowerPoint, you can sort of do them yourself, but I'm not going to do them in this particular lecture. We're going to skip past that. But in assessing the unconscious, this is where projective tests come into play that we talked about earlier. A projective test is where, again, projection is a defense mechanism. So I'm going to take my own feelings, beliefs, and ideas and project them onto a black and white image, as you'll see the young boy doing right here. These are known as a thematic apperception test. Then again, the idea behind a thematic apperception test is I'm going to look at this image and I'm going to push my feelings onto it. It's the same reason we cry at movies, or someone goes through a breakup, or the mirror neurons that we have, whatever. We're going to take our own world and project it onto that and identify with certain characters and everything else and put ourselves in that situation. So again, this ideas of these projective tests, whether it's the thematic apperception test that we just talked about, or Rorschach's ink blot, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is if our unconscious is in control. And I cannot use a conscious test to find out what I'm thinking. I can't give you a multiple choice personality test or a true false test, because then the ego is going to get in the way. If you take one of those tests, which Disney princess are you? Well, I want to be the girl from Frozen, so I'll say I like cold weather. Or which Jedi are you, or whatever. And again, you're none of them. But the idea that my ego is going to get in the way and it's not going to be a true test. So how can I test something that you're not thinking about? And again, the thematic apperception test is one. We took a look at this in the earlier lecture when we talked about Freud. Somebody looking at this is going to project their own feelings of their parents forcing them to do something to do. So this boy's parents are doing that. Someone's own projective thoughts of, I don't have the right equipment to do what I want. I don't have the right car to get the right job. Therefore, the boy is upset because he's got a bad violin or a cheap violin or a broken violin. So someone's going to take a look at that, project their own feelings onto that, as we talked about before in the anima and the animus. The woman would project her own masculine feelings onto the man, and a man would project his own feminine feelings onto the woman in this scenario. And we remember what that is. So when it comes to an ink blot test, which was originally done in 1921, Rorschach basically took a little drop of ink, put it on a piece of paper, folded it in two, opened it up, so we got two mirror images. And what he basically asked people to do is go, what do you see? What's going on there? And since it's very ambiguous and there's nothing quite there, the thought is that whatever's in you, you're going to project it onto there. Whether you see a big moose, whether you see a couple of ducks looking at each other, a couple of faces looking at each other here, or we go figure ground and then decide that the background is black, and then suddenly I got two profiles looking in opposite directions and kind of wearing a sombrero hat there. I could look at it overall as a moose, as an anteater, or if you're like me, you take a look at this and the first thing you see is a uterus or hook 'em horns, longhorn symbol, or whatever else the case may be. So there's something on your mind that's sort of, this is the lead to go with that. And these ink blots of the Rorschach ink blot test, very, very popular. Here's some examples here. What do you see? Is it a couple of alligators on either side? There's an alligator there. Is this a peace sign? How's it going? Is this a bunny rabbit going on here? Is this a moth? Is this an upside down butterfly? There's a lot of sort of different things that you can get out of this. We take a look at this, and suddenly, am I into Transformers? Do I have coyotes looking in opposite directions? And do I have a couple of birds who are nesting and they want to be fed? So there's a lot of things that we can get out of this one as well. Now, that's all in psychoanalysis. And remember, the job within psychoanalysis, it's my job to analyze you. Psychodynamic theory includes the ideas of Freud's psychoanalytic theory, which was again based in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But psychodynamic theory was put together by some of his disciples, some of his people. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. But people that he had taught. So they sort of took what Freud went with and everything else, and yeah, there's some sexual desires and gratification and everything, but not everything's about sex. So, and we could go to a whole thing of, was there a Freudian slip with me saying it that way? But again, the psychoanalytic theories, and an individual is being studied, they're being analyzed on unconscious effects due to their unique experiences. And it's all about you and your unique experiences. And it's very, very driven by sex. Psychodynamic is a little bit different, because psychodynamic says it's not just based on your unique experiences, but it's based on human experiences. And that we all have very common experiences. There's a sort of dynamic. We all have a similar unconscious that pushes us towards things. We all have a similar idea of what is good and what is bad, and what is a hero and what is a villain. And we all have these general unconscious beliefs in this, and they're very, very similar to one another. So the dynamic is not, it's not you just analyzing you. I could analyze a lot of people because we have very similar thoughts. We're not as unique as we think we are. So both of these are practiced with psychotherapy, where you go to someone and they look at you and everything else. But again, the psychoanalyst, it's going to be more unique to you. The psychodynamic, how do you fall in line with everybody else? Now, these neo-Freudians who were people who studied under Freud, Alfred Adler was the first to come up with what was referred to as the inferiority complex. Now, again, Freud had some things with inferiority, and basically talked about women feeling inferior to men because they don't have a penis, whatever else. It's not really about sex. And this is where the neo-Freudians and the psychodynamic theory is also a little bit different. Does sex have something to do with something? Sure, but it's not everything. It's kind of based on inferiority, and I'm trying to overcome that inferiority. It is the little dog that barks really loud. It is the guy who's been picked on all his life, so he goes to a gym to overcompensate not doing that. So again, these are all sort of ideas of how do I take this what was a weakness and make it a strength. Parenting matters. A child should learn self-reliance and courage from their father, and generosity and apathy from their mother. But this is also stereotypical role assignments that come within here. Or if I don't have a father figure in my life, I may overcompensate by trying to become the man of the house and all these other things. So that is, Alder is all based on inferiority and sort of an overcompensation for what we feel are our own weaknesses. Karen Horney felt that Freud was overly masculine in his views with penis envy and everything else, and women do not have to be defined with as how men see them. So it's not all sexual. The Oedipus complex, all that stuff is a little bit extreme. And she basically felt that most parent-child relationships were good, and any conflict was based on the love and the security that they got. It was social. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't, I want my mother. I just kind of want my mother's attention. I want her love. I want her approval. You know, I don't want her. I just want her to like me because she's my mother, she's my protector, she's all these other things, or whatever else the case may be. So it's not sexual in nature, it's social in nature. So again, she's another one of those neo-Freudians. And it's a very, again, common brushstroke thing that we can go through on that. And of course, the most popular of the neo-Freudians is probably Carl Jung, where he said the unconscious is important because not only does it just hold repressed feelings, but it also holds a collective idea of who we are and how we fit in society. And unlike Freud, who said everything is about sex and your penis and desires and I can't do my desires, he was much more positive, a very positive view about human nature. He felt that people were trying to develop to their potential, not because they were afraid of being a failure. They just wanted to be good, and they wanted that reward for being good. He said there's two types of unconscious. There's the personal unconscious, which Freud talked a lot about, but along with neo-Freudians in the psychodynamic theory, there's something called the collective unconscious. And with the collective unconscious, we all sort of have, again, these similar beliefs and these similar ideas. The personal unconscious rests upon a deeper layer. I call the collective unconscious, as Carl Jung says there, because the collective unconscious was where we can sort of understand one another, read one another, the micro expressions, all that nonverbal communication that is happening unconsciously, we can still sort of pick up. This collective unconscious, again, inherited instincts, urges, memories of the entire human species, where we've learned about things from the past, and we don't want to repeat these. They appear again and again in different cultures, and all of these things influence us. We like the idea of the underdog. That makes us excited because a lot of us feel like the underdog. We have a general idea of what a hero is supposed to be, self-sacrificing, put others ahead, blah, blah, blah. We've got the general ideas of what a man should be and what a woman should be, even though that is changing. Culturally, as we move forward, there's still the general idea that the mother is nurturing and the man is protective and all these other things. A sense of who you're supposed to be, of what a parent is supposed to be, of a spiritual search, death, and death as a driving force, and all these other things. He basically talked about 12 different archetypes and sort of the goals of these archetypes and the fears that sort of drive them as well. And these are, again, very general things and sort of things that we can see in one another and we see in ourselves, and it's not just unique to us. Our personalities are not really unique. We're a type, and our type is similar to others and unsimilar to a few others. He also talked about something called personas. And a persona is basically the mask that you wear. A big complaint that a lot of people have of their friends is, oh, Susie acts so fake. She acts this way in front of her friends, but this way in front of her. Yeah, we have different personas. There's a way that I talk as a teacher that I don't talk as a parent. There's a way I talk to my students that I don't talk to my children. I've had my own children stay after school waiting for a ride and will hear me talk to students and go, wow, you're really sort of nice to them. And it's not that I'm mean to my kids, but I'm not going to answer their stupid questions with as much enthusiasm as I may for a student. I may use more sarcasm with my kids, but they understand it and they sort of respond to it and everything else. When I'm telling you guys about my day or telling you a story or trying to get a point across to you, it's not the same way that I do it with my wife. I have not put together a video for my wife to look at so I can explain go look at my YouTube channel. So there's a different way I talk to her. There's a different way I talk to my children than I talk to my father. When I talk to my father, I'm a son. When I talk to my children, I'm their father. When I talk to my wife, I'm a husband. When I'm talking to you right now, I'm a teacher. So we have these sort of different personas. Right now, I'm sitting in my office alone, talking into a microphone. This isn't normally how I spend my day by myself. But this is where I'm going back to the persona of where I'm in a classroom, it's more of the persona of the performer, the comedian. But when I'm doing this right here, I've noticed I've tapped into the persona of when I was a radio DJ, kind of coming back to me here. We also have what is referred to as a false consensus effect, because we look at our own personality and the way we view the world and everything else. And we have a misperception that everybody else shares our beliefs because we hang around other people that have very similar ideas and beliefs that we do. Our friends are very like us, so we just assume everybody thinks this way. And a lot of times it becomes very difficult to understand people who do not think the same way that you do. How can you not have the same unconscious and everything else? So, you know, the fact that, you know, I'm breaking the speed limit, running a stop sign, cheating on a test, coming home. Well, everybody does it. Well, not everybody does it. Everybody does it. Nobody would stop at a stop sign. Nobody's stopping at the stoplight. You know, 290 would just be 90 miles per hour, and everybody would. It's not like that. All right. So again, this is referred to as projection as a defense mechanism. You know, you feel guilty for it, but you're saying other people are doing it. Also, the psychodynamic theory taps into what is called terror management theory. And terror management theory is around the idea that we get reminded of our limited time on this big blue marble. So there is what is referred to as death-related anxiety. We act to enhance our own self-esteem, but we're also looking for the answers of why am I here, what's next, everything else. And then when we're put in times of trial, we find ourselves much more appreciating little things that we have. Again, I'm putting together these lectures in April of 2020 while we're at home during the whole coronavirus and everything else. And I've never called my children as often as I have in the last few days, just to check in on them and have little Zoom meetings with them and everything else. Now, again, 3 of them are in New York. That's part of the reason. But it's just that when you see all these people losing loved ones suddenly, it makes you a little bit more appreciative of what you have. We become more religious in time of trial because we want to believe that there's an explanation and whatnot. So when we look at the psychoanalytic perspective, which includes the psychodynamic theory, we've got to take some things into consideration. Again, most of this has been under scrutiny because it's all about sex and everything else. Also, it all came up about 120 years ago when there's not a lot of science, there's not a lot of biological exploration of the brain and everything else. I got a dog barking right now, speaking of lack of frontal lobe. But there's researchers find little support that defends mechanisms disguised as sexual and aggressive impulses. Some of them are just simply survival tools. History doesn't sort of reflect well on Freud's idea about sexual repression being a psychological disorder and all these other things. But there is an unconscious. There are motivating factors. There is something behind that, the idea of a collective unconscious. It's all sort of there. So this is where, again, we'll talk about this when we talk about disorders in therapy, is that this is why a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists don't go all in on one school of thought. They'll pick a little of this and pick a little of that and pick a little bit of this. And so you got to take psychoanalysis with a grain of salt, but also it's got some root to it as well. Now, outside of that is what is called the humanistic perspective. The humanistic perspective takes us all the way back to Unit 1. We're talking about motivation, and we talked about Abraham Maslow, and we talked about how you cannot become a better person until you take care of all your needs. You start with your physiological needs, and you get your safety needs, and belonging, blah, 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 blah. You know, I got to be able to breathe. If I can't breathe, I don't worry about getting a job because I'm dead. I don't take care of these, I'm dead. I don't take care of these, and my survival is a little bit less. And then I could start to have friends, and then I could start to have self-esteem because my friends tell me how much they like me, which is going to start to give me that self-actualization and all these other things. So the ultimate psychological need that arises is based on not just these physical needs, but also these psychological, social needs. And what we're all trying to do, according to the humanistic perspective, is just be the best us we can be. How can I be the best me I can be? So let's get rid of inferiority, comparing myself to other people. I don't want to do that. Can I be the best Mr. Porter I can be? Can I be the best psychology teacher? I'm not going to be the greatest history teacher. Maybe I could be. But I'm not going to be the greatest physics teacher. Don't understand it. I just got to be the best me. I got to find my lane and be the best me that I can be doing what I do. And that's what humanism is all about. Can I be the best father I can be? I may not be the greatest father in the world, but can I be the best father that I can be based on my experiences and my skill set and everything else? This is all founded by Carl Rogers. I like to refer to him as Mr. Rogers, kind of an early reference for you guys. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, movie Tom Hanks came out about him. But Carl Rogers, all of it is about growth, fulfillment, individual, and it's all about building a relationship, you know, whether it's a parent-child, whether it's a leader group, teacher-student, therapist-client, whatever. But you gotta have a climate of growth in order for that to happen. I can't grow seeds if there is no sunlight. So I've got to have an ability to be able to grow this stuff. And in order to do this, the therapist with their client has to have three main factors. And this is the same thing with a parent and a child, a leader and a group, and a teacher and a student. First off, you got to be genuine. Open with your feelings, transparent, drop your facade. Again, as a teacher, I try to do this by sharing stories, whatever else. Just be very, very open and let the other person be very, very open, where it's kind of no judgment is made. Then you also have to have acceptance. So if everybody's going to bring everything forward, you got to have what is referred to as unconditional positive regard, which means that if I'm talking to someone, I've got to be accepting of that person. I can't make judgments of that person. I can be sharing my own failings, but also be still very accepting of what I'm bad at, but also accepting of what I'm good at, which is great in theory. And we'll talk about why it's not so great in theory in a second. But what I also need to have is empathy, which is an appreciation and an understanding of where somebody else is coming from. Not necessarily sympathy, but empathy. For example, somebody who's a racist, I find fascinating. You know, how did you get there? You weren't born that way. What's in your background? What were the stories? What sort of came behind that and everything else? And the thing is you got to get to know who you are, because you've tied various knots throughout your life. And unless you sort of come to the conclusion of who you are, you can't change it, which you see with the quote over here to the right. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. You can't change if you don't know who you are. You know, you can't get a good diet plan if you don't know how much you weigh. You've got to sort of take inventory first. All right. So genuineness, acceptance, and empathy. Now, again, the trick with this unconditional positive regard, though, is can be tricky for therapists. And one of the reasons that can be so tricky is I got a guy who comes in and says, I beat my wife. I'm an alcoholic. I beat my kids. I've lost 3 jobs, blah, 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 blah. And he just explains all these really bad characteristics. You can't applaud him for it, but you got to find some sort of silver lining to it. And you go, well, at least you've admitted you're abusive. And you've admitted it's alcoholism and you've come for help. So let's play with that and sort of work our way forward. Humanistic perspective is all based on a concept of yourself, because you're trying to figure out who am I, okay? And if it's positive, we tend to view the world in a more positive light. If we have a positive outlook on ourselves, odds are we have a more positive outlook on the world. But if we look negatively on ourselves, then we project that out into the world as well. So again, concept of the self is truly what the humanistic perspective is looking to find. And another problem with the humanistic perspective, though, is that when we leave ourselves to judge ourselves, we're not allowing someone else who's a psychoanalyst to sort of come in with an objective point of view. We tend to perceive ourselves more favorably than what we really are. We accept more responsibility for good deeds than we do for bad deeds. More responsibility for successes than we do the failures. The failures is, well, it was someone else's fault. I didn't get the notes. The teacher was bad. If I get the A, well, you never get the A and go, wow, he's an amazing teacher. No, I'm an amazing student. All right. So most people see themselves as better than average. We can't all be better than average. We can't all be above average. But we're even in a school district, Cy-Fair ISD, which has gotten rid of the D's. D is supposed to be below average. A is excellent, B is above average, C is average, and now we got C minus. So you're average minus, but you're still average. Or you're failing. There's no below average. It's okay to be below average at something. You may not be amazing at everything. So one of the problems with people analyzing themselves and doing it in a healthy way is sometimes we don't look at our faults. We don't want to see our faults. When we see other people fail, we think we want to do that, which again is another reason why we love reality television, is because we like watching these people do things and go, oh, well, I want to do that. When maybe we would. And this can lead to excessive pride, ethnocentrism, religiosity. You know, my ethnicity is the best ethnicity. My religion is the greatest religion. My nation is the greatest nation. And doesn't lead to a lot of self-criticism with this. But when it does, you're only looking to get a compliment out of it. So when you've got this humanistic perspective, which we'll get into more detail with disorders in therapy, and we've talked a little bit about before with motivation, self-actualization is very, very vague. There's a trick with it there. It promotes self-indulgence because it's all about me and my standard and what I think is right. And can also lead to delusional thinking. Although Americans believe human nature is basically good, we believe 4-1 that human nature is good, there's also a capacity for evil. I mean, just absolutely bad things. Nazis had high self-esteem and bias, but high self-esteem is not necessarily great. But humanism, the fact that everybody wants to be better and everything else, has been very important in child rearing, which is why everybody thinks a child is so special. Education, every child can learn. Management, every worker can work, and all these other things, and people overscheduling themselves and being competitive and all these other things. Humanism can lead to a little delusionism. I think is the best way to sort of state that. All right, then you got a review right there of the humanistic approach. And that is it. Next lecture, we're going to pick up with social cognitive, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong. No, personality trait theory. That's what's coming up next. Turn this off.